Okay, good morning. I'm applauding you. You're here at 9:15. That's pretty impressive on an early morning here with all the traffic in Barcelona. I'm going to welcome you. The next 30 minutes, what we want to do is kick off really with some key, what we call both best practices, the things to do when you're launching into a new venture, and also worst practices, things that you don't want to do. And as I think about that, the process here for really, the focus is really at the very top, the lessons learned, do's and don'ts. But we're going to go to a deeper level here about truly you as venture people, as CEOs, as investors, as part of a team. And let me start off with a question. I know it's early, you haven't had your coffee yet at the break. How many of you are actively involved right now either in a venture, a startup, or an investor in a venture or a startup? So either one or the other. Quick show of hands. Cool, I'm in the right place then. Very nice, good, okay. What I'd like you to do is the following. Think through about the team that Alex talked about, the skill sets, the requirements. We want to add on top of that some levels of complexity for if you're one of these people, whether in a startup yourself, investing, playing along, being part of the team, and so forth. That's really the goal of what we want to get to. And the books that we've written that we're not going to be referring to too much here, there's a whole series of books. In fact, some of you will get a copy of this afternoon. We're doing a second session, a build session, following this at 2:30. But everything I'm going to talk about in the next 30 minutes is based on real experience. About 500 different projects, engagements we've done with venture companies over the past 15 plus years. We've seen the highs, we've seen the lows, we've seen the frustrations, and I want to share some of those with you here. That's the lessons learned as we go through all this. We've sold about 3 million books overall. That's not a lot of books, by the way. Harry Potter sold that many books like on Tuesday morning during the busy times of Harry Potter. That was pretty fucking amazing. It took us more than 15 years to sell 3 million, so it's not quite the same impressive number. But what I'd like to do is the following, is to throw in front of you, where do you want to be? It's October of 2017 right now. Let's fast forward like 24 months into 2019, fall. How far along do you want your business to be? We do a lot of work with ventures, with A rounds, with angel invested companies, with larger startups. And the question is not what are you doing next month, but what are you doing 2 years from now? Will you be under your new assignment? Are you currently nurturing or something different? And so what I thought I'd do is throw a couple examples out there to really companies that we've been working with. Finn mentioned some of the larger companies we work with, but the real fun, of course, is the startups, the small companies. How many of you know Spotify? Anybody know Spotify out there? Cool, okay, wow, okay. Some real customers, I would imagine, too. They just hit, we do work with them, they just hit the 50 million mark. Not $50 million, not 50 million euros, 50 million monthly paying customers, each paying $9.99 a month. You're all pretty good at arithmetic, right? What's that cash flow look like per month? 9.99, carry the 2, square, that's $500 million a month in cash flow. This is really a 7-year-old company. That's pretty mind-boggling when you think of what they've done. They're on the B2B side. They're on the B2C side. They're moving into B2B as well. But the real focus for the Spotify is not where do you want to be vis-a-vis this in 2 years, but do you have a growth path that can take you to paying customers? That's really the goal. So we do work up in Stockholm with Spotify. It's been very impressive what they've been able to do. And our frameworks that I'm going to share with you today are some of the ones that we're using inside of that company as well. The others that we work with Google, with Nest, and other companies, we'll be using real examples today as well as we go through this. All right, enough of that. The reality is, what I want to be asking you is, there's about $1 trillion, okay, maybe 800 billion euros in opportunity coming up in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. And I'm going to lay out to you 9 different themes, and I'm hoping you in the room here see yourselves in at least one of these. There's 9 themes or patterns we see on the left-hand side, and then there's actually around this constellation another 9 key areas. And the reason I'm asking about October of 2017 is that everybody on the planet, in Barcelona, in Stockholm, in Boston, in Silicon Valley, know that these are some of the fundamental shifts happening in the marketplace today in tech. Here's the problem. Look to your left, look to your right, the people sitting next to you, we all know these are the trends. The question is going to be, and cloud is a current trend, past trend, future trend, but things like VR and AR, and IoT, and AI, and analytics, and predictive analytics, and big data, the whole scheme here, only a few of you are going to be able to look back in tears and say, we've got traction in the marketplace around one of these areas, or maybe two of these areas. I want that to be those of you here in Barcelona. That's the goal. And it doesn't mean you're going to be having 50 million customers a month paying, but the goal is, are you on path to gain real traction? And by traction, we're going to fundamentally define that as true revenue gen, true revenue growth, and profitability. Any idiot can have growth in revenue without profitability. That's not the goal. It's profitability and revenue growth. And I also want to share with you, there's a word that's horribly overused. This word disruption. You know, I've been in Silicon Valley for more than 20 years. Here in Barcelona, Stockholm, London, there's a lot of places with disruptive innovation. That is one of the most overused, ill-defined terms I can think of. In fact, people use it in terms like, you know, my mother-in-law is pretty disruptive, or I had a disruptive breakfast this morning, I'm feeling it right now. It's like, what the hell is disruptive? At Chasm Institute, we have 3 very specific criteria for whether or not you have a disruptive innovation. And those 3 criteria are the following. One is, does it require a change in skill level on the part of your target customer? Not on the part of you, but on the target customer. One is skill level. Is there a change in skill required? 2, is there a change in behavior required by the customer? That's different than skill. Does the customer have to think differently about a cloud app when it comes to medical records than they did when it was on-prem? Security concerns and so forth. So skill change, behavior change. The third one is there a change in workflow or process? So let me throw a quick quiz out to you. Think of Tesla, you know, luxury electric automobiles. Would you say that's a disrupt? Hey, it's got the same wheelchair wipers, it's got the same tires. Is Tesla a disruptive or an incremental innovation? Is there a change in behavior, in skill, or process for the customer, for you as the driver? What do you think? No or yes? Yeah, you say, you know what? It's not a big fucking deal. The only difference is the gasoline or diesel-powered engine is now an electric engine. It's not that big a deal. And if that's your conclusion, you're wrong. And the reason you're wrong is you're thinking about it from a technical standpoint, that there's the same electric windows. Is there a change for the user, the driver, in behavior, skill, and process? And the question is, if you're in Barcelona and you're driving to Grenoble, that's a long trip, or maybe the Pyrenees for skiing, do you have to think differently about that automobile than you do about a gasoline or diesel? And the answer is yes. What if this car breaks down along the way? Is the repair shop infrastructure in place? No. Elon Musk just introduced 10,000 emergency repair vehicles because they know they can't build shops fast enough to make repairs. How about range? How far are you going? It's a disruption to the marketplace, even though it's only one small change in the business model, and that's electric versus diesel or internal combustion engine. So be careful about you thinking about it from an incremental technology standpoint. So what I'd like to suggest is, can you think of, and I'm asking you right now, can you in the room, do any of you see your lives on any one of these 9 areas up here? Quick show of hands. Okay, about 2/3 of you. There's other things that aren't on this list that are still important. We heard last night the fireside chat from Alex on blockchain. That would be a nice one to add to the list as well. There's certainly not a finite list of 10. But as we think this through, a couple things to keep in mind. The companies that we work with and the companies that you've all got the same issues, which is how do you really move forward into the marketplace in a really systematic way? And so what I'm going to throw in front of you are 3 fundamental questions that are going to drive our do's and don'ts. 3 questions. And it turns out that those questions are really important ones. You'll see that on that rather plasticky sheet that you have in front of you. Okay? You'll see it somewhere in the lower left on the back page of that one page. That's for you to keep, obviously. Not so easy to take notes on it unless you're clever enough to bring a permanent marker with you. Otherwise, note-taking will not work on that. It'll be a temporary note. But the reality is, these 3 questions that I want you to ask yourselves now, but also tomorrow morning with your team, your new ventures or your investment team, there's a where question, a which question, and a how question. And if you can't answer those, then you have a vision, you might have an idea, you might have a fantasy, but you don't have a strategy. And let me add one more piece onto this complexity, which is somebody's going to leave this room and say, you know what Michael was talking about, we think is something called marketing strategy. And the answer is no. This is market strategy. This is how you go to market Target, pinpoint, win, grow, gain traction. Marketing is a function. It is not the business model that you need to be thinking about. It's a market strategy, not a market. Is that clear? We sometimes fuzz those up a little bit. It's market. It's those people out there called customers, partners, channels, etc., that we have in front of us. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take you on a high-level view of these three questions. And then at 2:30 this afternoon, we're going to do a deeper dive, for those of you interested, to go deeper into the analytics around each one of those three areas as we move forward into that process. So the first thing I should mention is there's the where question, which is a map. Some of you have seen this adoption lifecycle before. This is an updated version that we just came out with in our newest book, the newest Crossing the Chasm book that was just published. A couple things I should mention along the way. One is that first question around the technology adoption lifecycle, the tech market model, and the second question about where are you going to attack and also where are you not going to attack? What are you not going to go after? Hey, I know what. You had a meeting yesterday or tomorrow or last week. How many of you were really comfortable with your venture team going, we decided who not to target? How easy is that to do? Oh, we're leaving money on the table. We're leaving opportunity out there. I've got news for you. Every example that we've worked with, the last 225 new product launches, have been about a focused, disruptive effort that causes you to cross something off the list. And if you haven't crossed anything off the list, and your target market is 7.5 billion people on planet Earth, then surrender now. You need to have some level of focus, and I'm going to give you some tools to do that with. And then the third piece is this idea about there's basically 9 key points of failure in any venture. 9 key points of failure. You thought there were 100 of them, didn't you? There's only 9 ways to screw it up. There's actually 9 ways to do it well. If you do these right, then these are the points of success. And what's really amazing to us at Chasm Institute is with the teams that we work with, of those 9, there's only one area, and let me change the color so we can see that a little bit better. There's only one of those 9 that actually has to do with product. That's remarkable. There's things about partners, about customers, about your messaging, about your channels. There's only one about your partner, about your product. And it turns out that there's a model that we developed many years ago that we're big believers in. And what this really speaks to is what we call the whole product model. And when you think about the whole product, the thing that we don't worry about with our clients, with our startups, with our ventures, is what we call the core product. Most of you have amazing core products. In fact, let me ask, how many of you think of yourselves as a B2B business? B2B first, okay? All right, about 2/3 of you. How about B2C? Okay. And then I'm gonna ask the trick question, you know it's coming. How about B2B2C, where you have some intermediate, okay, got it. So some of you raised your hands twice, and that's the right answer. What I'm gonna suggest is whether you're B2B or B2C, the reality is that most of you have amazing core products. We don't worry about, you know what we worry about a lot? Is what we call the whole product. And the whole product are all the things, you might call them ancillary, but they're not. They're all the key enablers that get normal customers who wanna buy your product, and not just the core technology. And we're gonna see that right now, many of you sitting here may have what we call an 80% whole product, or even more complex. It's not a cute acronym, sorry, it's MVWP. It's minimum viable whole product. It could be MVWFP too, minimum viable whole fucking product, but we don't say that early in the morning. And that says what's everything the customer needs and nothing they don't need to get their solution done, whether B2C or B2B. And I know most of you are thinking, we've got this one figured out, but the pieces around it, the legacy interfaces, the UX, the ability to actually build and grow on top of that, the connectivity issues, the consulting perhaps for B2B, all those things matter deeply, and we're gonna come back to that in a few minutes. So the reality is that of those questions that we have for you, the first one we're gonna hit is this question about where are we in the adoption curve. And if you get one of our books this afternoon, because a few of you are gonna actually get the book at 2:30, we have a small set of those to hand out as a small gift, you're gonna be able to read in that book, the Crossing the Chasm book, about what it really takes to build what we call a winning 9-point strategy. But for now, let's delve into what the tech market model really is all about. And the tech market model is nothing more than a roadmap. It's actually, when we think about the impression of what we want to get to, it's a technology adoption roadmap. Some of you remember the initial curve. The initial curve was called the tech adoption life cycle. That was the first time buying by customers of a new technology, AI or blockchain, which, by the way, blockchain is over here somewhere. That's not a bad place to be. It's just where it is. And what we're going to see is that on top of that is your real goal, if you're an entrepreneur, is how do you get to the real harvest point on Main Street? And this brings me to something that's a lie in high tech. I thought I'd bring this up now. Most of you are familiar with what we call the S-curve. Have you been in those meetings where people talk about the S-curve and they're going to go, well, it's Q1 right now. In Q4, we're going to ramp. By ramp, we're going to go to volume in Q4. Have you been in those meetings? And you go, okay, so you get through Q1 and not much happening, you're not expecting much. You get to Q2 and there's a little bubbling, but not the revenue gen you're expecting. Q3, not much more. You get to Q4 and you haven't ramped. You're still lots of pilots, lots of early initiatives, but no volume. So you turn to the dude who said it was going to ramp in Q4, and you ask him, I thought you said it was going to ramp in Q4. And he says, yeah, it is, just not this Q4. Some other future one in the future. Thanks a lot. And the reason is because this thing called the S-curve, it's a lie. There's no such thing as a disruptive innovation going smoothly to market and ramping this way. And in fact, the reason this adoption curve is important is because there's something we call the chasm. You can read about it. We're not going to go into detail in it here, but it's basically the key difference between the early market and the main marketplace. Whether it's in AI or VR or cloud or big data or predictive analytics, it says you can excite the early market. That has nothing to do with normal customers buying your product. In fact, it's almost the opposite. And so what we see is instead of an S-curve, we see a series of adoption groups. We call those segments in what we call the bowling alley. You're all smart enough to figure out the hand-drawn and the nicer chart. These are related. And it says, before you can scale, can you find at least one segment of normal customers? Not you, because you're not normal, but normal customers, pragmatists, who represent a majority of the market, who say, I can no longer imagine life without this device, without an AR device, or a virtual reality device, or whatever it might be. And what we're going to find is as you go through this process, there's actually some patterns that we've explored and discovered. And it turns out, and I'll skip the drama if there is any here, and it says there's basically 8 key patterns. 8 key patterns, and the one that we think is the cool one, by the way, you're not making money in this one, but it's okay. It's the early initial excitement by about the 10 to 12% of the marketplace who actually gives a damn when you have an 80% whole product and you're not ready to really leverage that into the main marketplace. That implies that about 88% of the money, the euros, the yen, whatever it might be, is on the right-hand side. And here's the problem. For a lot of you, you're in the early market and you represent the early adopter. You got to hire a few normal people into your team as well to make sure you understand the pragmatist group. So what are 2 do's and don'ts that we should address? One is, be really careful. There's a rectangle here that you can read more about in the book, or you can just go to our blogs if you want to save some money, and we've got some good blogs on LinkedIn and our website as well. And there's a rectangle here, and we call this the rectangle of death, but it's also the rectangle of something we call lack of price elasticity. Now, if you went to business school here in some of the fine schools in Barcelona or at INSEAD or elsewhere, you know what price elasticity is. That says for every dollar or euro or percent drop in price, what's the commensurate increase in volume? Seat licenses, costs, etc. And what I've got to tell you is you've been in meetings and somebody says, you know what, we are not hitting our numbers in Q3. We're not going to ramp by Q4. Let's drop price by 10 or 15% because you know what, in my last company, that doubled our sales. Have you been in those meetings? Yeah, I hope not, but you have been. I see a lot of shaking heads. And it turns out if you're in that rectangle of what we call late early market or chasm, and that's why this mapping is so important in early bowling alley, and you drop price by 10 to 15%, what do you think happens? Nothing. Nada. No good. Nothing happens. In fact, something does happen. You don't change demand, and you've just screwed up your margins permanently. And now you have less money to put back into market development. What it is when you remember people saying price was elastic, it was later on in the marketplace when the category is already well accepted, and there when you drop price, you've got a much more powerful upswing in elasticity. So that's one don't assume price can get you across the chasm. Hell, there's stuff that's free that's stuck in the chasm. Linux was free, and how long did that take to get across? About 6.5 years. And by the way, while we're timing things, you might be very excited about AI right now and artificial intelligence, and I am too. Do you know AI was in this early market, you know how long? 27 years. 27 years. A lot of white papers, a lot of conferences, a lot of talk, and finally in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing AI move across the chasm into the main marketplace in a few applications. In cybersecurity, in some of the smart home devices, in some voice recognition, but it's still pretty limited. It has not had a tornado yet. And so the reality is, as you think this through, one don't assume price will help you. You need a reasonable price, and below that, you're not going to get elasticity moving. Let me clean this up and give you one other example of a don't before we pull some other thoughts together in this presentation. The second one is when you're in what we call bowling alley, which is very segment defined or specific. Notice something we wrote here. Only 15% of the typical sales reps can actually sell here. So don't hire somebody from Unilever or Procter & Gamble or Daimler who you think is a great sales rep and they've been selling stuff that's been on Main Street for 25 years and expect them to win with you in the evangelizing part. Because you know what? They've been making their numbers over on the right-hand side, but those are what we call transactional sales. What kind of selling happens in the bowling alley? Consultative selling. It's trusted advisor. It's a very different skill set. And so what you're going to see, and I promise you this, is that about in the next year, if you have a disruptive solution you're selling, whether it's online or direct sales, that greater than or equal to 85% of your sales will come from less than or equal to 15% of your sales team, the typical sales team, who figured out how to sell consultatively. And you think, we'll train the other people? Good luck with that. So the reality is there's some don'ts here that we want to be very careful about. And so thinking this through from a time parameter standpoint, what we're going to do this afternoon on the mapping part, this is kind of the showing of upcoming attractions, is the reality is we're going to get very specific. Okay, hold on. This is the headache slide. I get that. That this afternoon you're going to see there's actually 14 different adoption stages that your product might be in right now, and you don't get to pick where it is. You don't get to choose. It's where the market puts you. And so at 2:30 today, you'll hear more about the details of that level of granularity, not right now. The second piece we're going to be talking about that's real important is the where. Where do we attack first? And there's a myth, and you're going to be seeing this as we go through the process, both now and this afternoon, is that there's a lie that says we can be all things to all people. In fact, I'm going to throw a very technical phrase at you. Spray and pray. Have you heard that phrase before? Spray and pray is, let's launch the product, let's go very horizontal, and then assume and hope that somewhere, somebody, 20% of the market will buy our product. That is a great strategy later for tornado. It's a horrible strategy for transition from early market to the main marketplace, to the bowling alley. And so if these words are foreign to you, that's okay. But the reality is, I'd like you to be thinking about levels of where you might be, and we're going to be looking at that. So the slide that's an important one that comes up in this discussion is one that we're going to take some real examples for a couple minutes. We call it beachhead strategy. And everyone, and I'll skip the build here and get right to it, the whole idea about getting from this 10 to 12% to the main marketplace is not going to get you there with spray and pray or horizontal. In fact, if you show me an example of having, even the iPod was not horizontal to start with. It focused on one specific segment, a demographic. But it could be a vertical market for B2B and so forth. And what I thought I'd show you is that typically the spray and pray is about figuring out the needs of the broad horizontal marketplace and then averaging your solution out, which is a recipe for frustration, lack of traction, etc. And what you're going to see is probably the most important thing I say to you this morning is based on our 500 examples. And it says that before you can dominate a market, you got to dominate a specific segment first. Everybody says our forecast should be something like this, right? It's going to be slow for a couple quarters, and then we go to tornado. There's not a single example of that having worked in Silicon Valley or Boston or anywhere else. Not if it's disruptive. And I bring you one example. One of my favorite ones is the Jeff Bezos example. Some of you as well have been lucky enough to meet him. When Jeff started Amazon, what was the one product he focused on? Was it lawn furniture, diamond rings, shoes, music, and AWS, all those? No, for 6 years, he hit one key on the piano. What was that key? What was the product? Books. Can you find a more boring, oops, I shouldn't say that because we have books. Can you find a more boring category than books? And the answer is no, and that was the point. Did you ever think about why Bezos picked books? He had a very clear, articulate reason. He said, I wanted something so that the normal customers, the pragmatists, would never have to wonder, is what I'm buying online different from what I'm buying brick and mortar? And if you're buying the Stephen King novel or something else, it's like it's the same goddamn book. But if you're buying diamonds or food or other things, the question was always, is it different? In fact, if you want a little example of this, Amazon has crossed the chasm in many things, but in fresh food they have not. In fact, they bought Whole Foods for $12.8 billion because how many of you have bought fresh tomatoes and lettuce and celery online from Amazon or elsewhere? You're a pretty early adopter if that's going on. So the reality is 6 years of that, they built out their e-commerce platform and then went broader. How many of you sitting here this morning would have had the discipline to focus on one specific application for 6 years before you move on to something else? You would have said, no, we're leaving money on the table. We should be in music and lawn furniture and diamond rings and wedding gowns. And the answer is, you got to focus and win on something first. In fact, Spotify's done that, LinkedIn's done that, Workday, and so forth. And so what you'll see this afternoon is a set of analytics that actually allows you to actually decide how are you going to actually score and rate and rank. We won't get into it now, but you'll see this at 2:30. How do you actually score which segment to go after, and also which one do you ignore? And then the third piece and wrap-up over these last couple minutes is really the question, and let me just turn to that slide now, the question of how do we actually move forward? What's the process about how we actually do this? And so that next piece, which is around the 9-point strategy, again, we'll go deeper this afternoon, but it turns out that there's 9 important elements, not just product. And so as we finish up this early session here this morning, I hope this is giving you a slight headache to think there's more stuff than just your product to be thinking about. And on your sheet, in the lower right-hand corner, a couple things. You'll see that red blotchy slide, which we'll hit this afternoon, that says these are 9 specific, if you can't answer these 9 questions, then you don't have a strategy for going to market. You got a hope, you got a fantasy, you might have some delusional thinking, but you don't have a strategy. And so in this last minute or two, thinking this through, a couple things to note and to observe. You know, one is you can have fun in the work that you do. I thought I'd share with you a couple thoughts. One is if you have questions after this session is over, I've already introduced myself. Mark Rose, one of my colleagues, if you choose to speak in Spanish or French and not English, Mark, if you could just stand up for a second. Mark's a fellow Harvard Business School graduate with me. Mark will be around as well today. If you want to ask him about some of the methods and tools, happy to do that. And then I thought I'd finish with what we call really 6 key facts to think about. The one is we know what works in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley does not have all the answers. We've worked in Boston, we've worked in Chicago, we've worked in other places. And let me jump right down to this. We were the ones that actually named this Labs. You might have heard of Labs now. We've written some blogs about it. We believe there's 5 key geographies in Europe that are driving entrepreneurialism, venture, and so forth. And those 5, you're part of that here. Yeah, there's London, yes, there's Amsterdam, yes, there's Berlin, but one of the B's is Barcelona. And we don't change this out to make the local audiences happy. In Stockholm, I also show Barcelona on the list, okay? But the reality is you have an incredible opportunity. And what I'd love for you to do is inject in your smart teams a bit of analytical thinking that we at Chasm can provide, whether through our books or our blogs, just asking a question to Mark or me. We're happy to do that during the day-to-day. And if you do get our book, don't read the whole book to start with. Read those first 65 pages, jump in, enjoy, and move from there. So what I'd like to suggest is, as Alex now moves to the next section, is one quick reminder. As you come back this afternoon, you'll have lunch. Don't eat too much. We want you to be awake at 2:30. At 2:30, we're going to do the second piece of this, which is the dirty details around product launch. And then lastly, in the afternoon, Alex has organized an informal Q&A that if you want to go even deeper, some of you won't want to, some of you will, whatever the case might be, at 4:45 we'll be doing that. So let me thank you at this point. The details will follow. This is a great day that Alex and the team have organized, and I wish you a really productive one, and a fun one, and a spiritually enlivening one as well. So thank you very much. Thanks.